Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. It's the first day of racing at the National Championships weekend. Of course, there have also already been a number of National Championships earlier in the season, but this is the dedicated UCI weekend, and with me here to discuss the racing of Saturday is Issam.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. In the past years, we've always combined all the National Championships into one podcast, but to allow us a bit more time and to maybe make tomorrow's episode a bit shorter than, I think last year we had like an hour and 45 minutes for all the racing. To kind of prevent something like that, we'll just cover today's races now. So that means we'll cover the Belgian Women's Championships first, then turn our attention to the Czech Championships, and then we have a couple of brief comments on the handful of other races that there were this weekend. Good, the Belgian Women's Championships then. Without Sanne Cant, Marion Norbert-Ribeyrolles was the big favorite here. Cant decided to not participate, she's retiring at the end of the season, and did not want the jersey to not be on display in case she would win but wouldn't race next season. With that, her teammate Norbert-Ribeyrolles was the big favorite, but just like in the previous 2 years, Ribeyrolles had major issues in the first lap. She had a bad getaway, then kind of moved towards the side of the circuit, got into a bit of a pushing battle with another rider, was involved in a minor crash in the first corner, broke 2 spokes in her wheel, needed to go into the pits to get a new bike. De Keuster-Bouwpen tried to capitalize on this with the injured Laura Verdonschot racing together with Alicia Frank. Those two put up the pressure at the front, they got away in the second lap, but it wasn't to be for them. Ribeyrolles, after some more issues in the first lap, really got under steam in the second lap. Halfway through, she moved past Truije and past Brouwers in the chasing group to take the lead. She closed the gap to the 2 De Keuster-Bouwpen riders, passed them on the off-camber before launching an attack on the following road climb. 3 seconds became 6 seconds, 6 became 12, and Ribeyrolles was never seen again. She claimed her first Belgian national title. It comes a number of years after she won the French A-Lead title as a U23. A lot has happened since then. She took the win ahead of Verdonschot, who, despite her iliac artery issues, managed to clinch second place, with Brouwers finishing third. Issam, I thought it was quite funny and also ironic in a way that Ribeyrolles after the race said, well, I didn't really panic after all my shenanigans in the first lap because I had some training with that the past 2 years at the Belgian Championships. It seems that stress and Ribeyrolles at these championships remain quite locked together, quite correlated, but in the end she got it done today. She did what was expected and she secured the win on a snowy course.
Yeah, she did, and it was, I definitely think that she had some stress, and that's normal to be nervous for a championship, and especially when you arrive there as the favorite in a way, and I think that no one really doubted that she was the main favorite, and the biggest challenges would probably come from herself. And I think that the circumstances definitely were tougher in the first lap, having to fight back in a way, and I think that is always a situation in which it's very hard to control yourself and get through that, to keep your cool. But I think that she somewhat managed to do so. I think that definitely she was nervous. But once she was in the lead, she kind of felt that, everything was somewhat more in control. And you could see it the way she was riding. It was more, in a controlled fashion in a way. And she was able then to just steam off. And I think it represented basically what we have seen this season from the Belgian ladies in a way. We have seen that they were probably, if you look at the better performances in a way, Ribeyrolles was always somewhat the outstanding Belgian woman. Especially if you look at how the others were racing. I mean, Verdonschot definitely had her moments, but it wasn't the moments Ribeyrolles had. Ribeyrolles was struggling at times and was not always able to produce that. But over the course of the season, you could definitely say that she was the strongest. Cant definitely was also showing a great promise in the last couple of races. But I think that Ribeyrolles also did her fair share, and Cant wasn't racing, so you automatically go to Ribeyrolles as the main woman. And so I think that we saw something that we could have expected, and it was great to see that she was able to put it off, because it looked like it really meant something for her, and she's going to have the present of wearing that the Belgian colors for an entire season.
Ribeirol was clearly the strongest rider today, because if you look where she makes a difference, it was on a power section, the tarmac climb following the off-camber. That move on the off-camber was also quite nice, because she took a weird trajectory, shouldering her bike, running up, remounting much earlier and riding the inside line of the second off-camber corner, whereas the others were either remounting late or running that complete thing. She copied that move from Sterre Vervloed, who won the Belgian U23 title, because as Ribeirol was so far back in the first lap, she could observe some riders in front of her, and Vervloed was one of them. She took that trajectory and it worked out quite well for Vervloed. So Ribeirol copied that, and it was part of her race-winning move. It would have come eventually. It was inevitable, seeing her strength today, and we know that she's a rider who has the power to do that. But as you say, there were definitely some mistakes in the first lap, especially the first lap and a half. In many other races, you don't really get away with that, and she was lucky that the field today wasn't as big, because if this happens in a World Cup start, you're way further back, especially if the pack is much bigger and you're caught up in a crash in the first turn. It's quite normal in Zolder. You see crashes a lot there because the start-finish straight is so long, the speed is so high, and it's really... It really narrows there. The first left-hander and then the 180, it's recipe for disaster, really. I don't think I've ever seen one race there that hadn't had a favorite or a shadow favorite knocked out of contention there or knocked back. And Ribeirol came back. She did what was expected of her in the end. The course conditions, I would say, if it had been a bit more like it was when the junior men raced, even more firm, even more frozen, we could have potentially seen Truije put up a bigger battle. Truije was definitely struggling a lot with the technicalities necessary of being a cross rider. She doesn't do it as much anymore, and she's a bit out of the rhythm, which was definitely visible. You saw it when Ribeirol attacked. Truije struggled with getting into her pedal and really lost a chunk of time there. And once she got going again, she quickly caught up to Frank, and then her gap to Verdonschot and Brouwers was quite stable. She even regained a bit of time until she crashed again. So I would say that's a bit unfortunate. And then, yeah, I mean, Verdonschot, Issam, I don't really think we can say much more about her, right? I mean, despite her iliac artery issues, she finished second. It's a respectable ride. She was reasonably happy with it. Of course, she hoped more at the start of the season, but yeah, what can we really say about an injured rider finishing second here? We need to probably applaud her fighting spirit, but apart from that, I don't really like to do she's racing at 50% now, what her coach said, so next year she'll be much better and easily destroy Ribeirol.
Nah, I wouldn't go that far, to be honest. I think, as you say, it's a bit tricky to really comment on it. I think that it was a brave ride, because if you look at the circumstances, it definitely wasn't going to be an easy ride. But it's just very hard to judge if we had a Verdonschot that was 90% or 80%, or that is just very hard to judge. And based on the injury, I think you can basically say that it was a brave ride. I hope that it was responsible, and I think it somewhat was. But she has a solution on what went wrong. Although, if I look back at the races that she has done and the way she went through her season, there's definitely also reason to believe that she definitely did too many races in a short span of time, in a way, and I don't know how much that played a role in the eventual injury and all of that. But if you look at the season planning in a way, I think that is also something she can take with her after she is able to recover from the injury and able to get back on the bike, because it feels to me in a way that also could have played a role in declining spiral in terms of how her season ended, in a way, because I don't know if she's still going to be racing after today about that. But yeah, so if this is the last race of the season, I definitely think that after everything is done and recovery is started, I think that some reflection on how she went through the season, it could definitely be something beneficial, and try to bounce back from that next year, because I think the expectations were definitely somewhat high, and I think that she definitely did not fulfill that in a way. It looked at times that it was going to happen, especially in the beginning of the season. There was some hope, but I think that you can conclude that after this season for her, we can definitely say that it was somewhat of a disappointing season. And she has to find her way and bounce back from that in a way. So, there's maybe some positives in that she now knows the solution for the injury that she has, and hopefully it will be after the surgery. It's a road back to full form, and we will see more from Verdonschot next season.
She can certainly do better than this, and that's obviously attributed to the injury, but in the end, I feel like Verdonschot and Ribeyrolles are just sub-top riders. They're both not going to make the step to compete with the best riders in the world, and that's where they are. I feel like they're just solid riders for places 5 through 10 in the most stacked races, if they have a good day. Verdonschot, a rider that I would place roughly in the category with Casasola, just about, and then Backstedt, Schreiber, Vash, kind of that pyramid. Vorst is also in there. Ribeyrolles may be a bit behind, but very good if the course requires a lot of power in the mud. Behind these two sub-top riders, there's quite a big gap, and we went over it in the preview, and I don't really want to repeat everything we said there, but Belgium is searching for narratives. They're searching for someone or something to hold on to. Without Kant, who the last couple of years has not been that great anymore, but always carried a legacy, they were able to kind of like, oh, but we have Kant, right? It's Sanne Kant. We need to respect her. And now Kant isn't there. And then people who are obtaining the same results all of a sudden aren't good enough anymore. So they're looking for younger riders. Julie Brouwers finishing third. In my opinion, and I might be wrong, but what I've seen so far from her, she lacks the engine. Her engine isn't big enough to compete, but her technical skills are very, very good. There's been heavy investment in her, investments by the Charles Legois Roastery team, by the Wellens brothers, now mostly just Bart, former world champion, of course. And that's really benefiting her, but you could also see it today that she kind of lacked the engine at key moments. And then behind there's not that much coming through, which hurts. So Issam, if we look at the way that the Belgians also do their broadcast today, you can definitely see that the women are not the priority, right? So about Brouwers, they said she could have still competed in the U23 category, which is false. She is a first-year elite. And then just how reactionary everything is. So Ribeyrolles wins. This story could drag on for a couple of years, but it won't be a dynasty like Sanne Kant. There are a few riders in the waiting room, and well, for Verdonschot, of course, we need to keep her in mind, but Ribeyrolles can definitely win a couple of years in a row. That's reactionary. Then, what kind of person is Ribeyrolles? The commentators say, I don't know, I just know she's very friendly. They mention she finished third in a French World Cup, which she never has. And then they say, well, she needs to improve so much, because Ribeyrolles should never be outside of the top 10 in a single World Cup, and still it happens. They kind of go off the start of today's race, which is not really how all of her starts are. So I wonder how you see that. What is the potential of Ribeyrolles? To me, she's just a rider for the muddy courses, and there's no shame that she doesn't quite deliver as much on the fast courses.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think that in terms of potential, there is definitely, on a good day, she's definitely able to mix it up, get herself a shot to a top 5, maybe a podium on a good day if there is some absence and she has a very good day and she's able to get it going. I think that definitely a podium is within her possibilities, and in the smaller races she can definitely go for a win if the starting field is not packed. So she shouldn't be carried away, and I don't think she is. Although the Belgian media sometimes has some difficulties with perspective and reality and truth at times, and I think that also played a role today, and that will play a role in several occasions, especially on the women's side. And well, I don't know. Those are just things that happen, and it is for them. I think, just as we said before, it's just a difficult situation they are in, and they want to see improvements very fast, and they will take a positive and make a whole story about it. And I think for Ribeyrolles, she probably knows what is possible. I think that in her, they definitely, Belgium as a country have a very respectable champion. They will see the jersey for sure in the next couple of races, and also next season in certain races, especially the muddy races where the big engine can be used. I think that could be a top 10 in World Cups if we have a very strong field, maybe a top 5 at times. But she can still grow a little bit, but we shouldn't be we shouldn't get too carried away. I think that it needs to be put in perspective, as this whole race, to be honest, should have been put into a certain perspective, because, we were looking, as you say, to the subtop of the women category. And behind that, I think the more you look down on the results, the sadder you got in a way in terms of level. No disrespect, but that's just how it is at the moment.
So speaking about perspective, I think we should also put Ribeirol's development in perspective, because maybe in terms of results she hasn't progressed as much, but I certainly think as a rider she's progressed, because when she became the U23 world champion in Dubendorf, she had 2 good seasons before there, already excelling in the muddy conditions. But compare the field of then to the field of now. The field now is much deeper and much stronger at an elite level. Sure, some of the riders have moved out, like Kastelein and Truije, but they've moved out because they didn't do it out of luxury. They did it because their results declined as more other riders stepped in, so they tried to look for success elsewhere. And I would argue for both Kastelein and Truije it has worked. Ribeirol has kept her results relatively consistent, but is doing so against a higher quality of field, which makes me think that maybe it doesn't really look if you only look at the results. And that's more the frustration I was getting with the way that everything here in Belgium worked today. The crowd attendance was super, super poor. Sure, the weather played a role, but tomorrow in the same conditions there will be many, many more people. They made a lot of mistakes in the broadcast, and I'm not bashing them for necessarily making a number of mistakes. We also make mistakes on this podcast. I don't blame anybody for not being perfect, but the mistakes they made were from a different level than the mistakes they make at the men's side. And the fact that they don't know anything about Ribeirol, but they can tell me everything about all these junior men and their local cycling clubs and which other 15-16 talents on the men's side there are there, I found that quite painful to listen to. But enough from the broadcasters, let's move to the actual issues here. And again, I mentioned a number of these big issues in the preview podcast, so I'm not going to repeat them. But again, the women's racing in Belgium is not taken as seriously as the men's racing. There was a standalone junior women's championship, but they didn't get to race the full course. That was not due to snow and ice. This was already mapped out on Wednesday. They raced the small lap because it would else be too long or too difficult to take the climbs at the end, which is a joke, because I've seen the junior women do perfectly fine in Zonhoven. I've seen them do perfectly fine in Hulst, and those courses are way more challenging than what they have here in Zolder. So that's a joke. I also believe it's against the UCI rules to do that. Then the cameras are all on and they're able to share clips from the races on the web pages, but they don't broadcast it. They don't even put it on the stream, which I then think is different compared to the junior World Cups, because there the cameras are briefly on. This was fully broadcasted, but we just didn't get to see it for no reason. So the third thing and that's the final thing I want to note here, and that's a bit of a difference rather than a big complaint, but if you look at the junior men's race which was broadcasted, you can see that a lot of these riders at the front, they're like part of these teams, right? So they're on the Star Casino team, which is affiliated to Paulshausen. Or they are on the Young Lions team, which is affiliated to, of course, the Glowy Lions team. Gilles Lejeune, he's already picked up by Deschart. There's a lot of these teams that all have their grassroots pyramid networks, and that's what I like so much about Belgium, right? Like, there's all these clubs, and some of them are affiliated, and other are strong independent clubs, but there's heavy scouting going on. If you look at the junior women's race, like these riders, the best Belgian riders, they're not picked up by these teams. They are pretty much on their own. They're racing for their small local team. The only team that has invested in a pyramid structure there is the Keuster Bouwpunt, and that should be admired. And the federation, honestly, I don't think that, despite how highly people often look at the Belgian federation, I question if they've done enough over the years to support the clubs on the junior women's side and below to get more of those riders actually signing up. There's a lot more young women in Belgium riding bikes than racing, and that percentage is also a lot lower if you compare that to the men's side. The women ride a bike, but they don't do the races, partly because their system is so unrewarding. If I then hear the Belgian national team coach say during the men's junior race about one of the riders in contention for the title, well, I know he's a mountain biker, but yeah, that's kind of all I know. I don't even know who his parents or his guardians here at the race. Then I start to question, okay, maybe the problem with the Belgian Federation is also a bit bigger than what I initially thought.
It is in a way a little bit problematic. I think maybe has something to do with success. Belgium is a country that has been prominent in the forefront most of the categories for a number of years, and I think that as a country they should have been very happy with Kant, because I think that Kant made a lot possible and changed the mentality in a way in terms of how the federation maybe looked at the women's category. And I think that also, it's definitely they are not in a bad situation or something. I think that they are on the way up. Sometimes you hear these stuff and then you see the things that are happening and certain situations and that are, it's not really where you want to be as a country and as a federation. And I think that is a big issue. But I think that they are on the way up in a way. I feel that they somewhat understand the issue, that they somewhat understand how they need to solve it, despite the fact that it will take time and it will take a lot of effort. And I think that currently is going to be the most important thing: patience, time, and making sure that you put a lot of effort in. But it's just, you hear these things and it's just not great. And they can take a lot of, as an example, France. And if you look at the Czech Republic and the way they go on with their youth, and to be honest, even if you look at the Netherlands, how they are trying to develop their youth, all those countries do it in a way more intense than if you compare it to Belgium, in which, it's basically those kind of teams that have those satellite teams, and from there on they start to grow. And if you then are picked up by one of those teams, you get the chance. And I think that the federation just as a whole maybe distance themselves a little bit from the development, while it should probably be more beneficial if they were a bit closer to that. And I think those are just things that are happening right now, and it's going to be interesting to see if they are able to get out of it. But I'm kind of hopeful for arguably the biggest nation in cyclocross.
I think you raise a very good point there. The contrast is that in France and the Czech Republic, the federation is in charge of the development, but in Belgium, a lot of it is left to the teams, and the federation takes care of them around the biggest events. And sure, they arrange these local training points, but a lot is really in the hands of the teams. And since that structure isn't there on the women's side, they might also not necessarily have the know-how on how to do it. And of course, it can happen that de Klerk doesn't know who a certain rider is or who his parents are. It's probably not smart of him to say it on the broadcast, but it was just an anecdote to kind of support here the feeling that I got here this weekend. I respect the efforts that Ellen van Looy does, and I think on the long term they will have a decent amount of effect. I've seen a couple of their U17s in action, as I said before, and there is some relatively promising riders coming through there. So yeah, let's wait and see how it develops, but certainly it also doesn't really surprise me this weekend what we've heard and seen. I didn't really expect anything else, but since we have a bit more time, I thought it would perhaps be a bit interesting to discuss. But enough for now. I think if I'll just name the rest of the top 10 behind Rieberol, Verdonschot and Brouwers, we find Frank, Truije and Peters. Sterre Vervloed finished 7th, the U23 world champion. Then Xaide van Sinai was 8th, slightly disappointing race for her. She finished ahead of Kiona Krabbe and Nette Koppens. Just outside of the top 10, Joyce van der Beke finished 13th. She's the last Belgian champion before Sanne Kant, and she won the Belgian Elite 2 national title, which is for elites without a contract. Good. To the Czech Republic then. I glanced through this race a little bit. Michal Boros took a walkover victory, attacked early in the race and was never really seen again. Václav Jezek finished second after a close battle with Maxime Kerel and Jakub Tupalik, with Tupalik claiming the third spot. I think it's not really that surprising to see Boros win here, Issam. We both predicted that ahead of the race, and he delivers. He's been their best rider, and I think with Jezek they have a dedicated cross rider coming up, but if he can live up to the career of Boros, that remains to be seen. Boris is now the record holder at the national championships, but he was quick to point out that he did not want to be associated as the most successful or best Czech cyclocross rider, quickly pointing out that Stybar and Simonek have world titles and he doesn't.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think that's a humble way of approaching it in a way, but I think he can also take some pride in that record. But yeah, as you said, it was somewhat predictable that he was going to be able to bring it home and win his 8th title. And I think, as you said, Jacek is definitely someone in which the Czech Republic on the men's side have maybe something that can work out, that can get in the mix. I don't know to what extent can expect things from him, but I feel that it can definitely be somewhat promising and it will be interesting. I think that in general, Czech Republic, on the women's side, they definitely have something going, and it looks like in a couple of years they will be a country that at least have some women in the forefront. But if you look on the men's side, it is there, but they have some work to do, and it's going to be interesting to see if they will be able to bridge the gap to the more successful Belgium and Dutch riders at the moment, and also the French riders that are coming up, of course.
Yeah, speaking about the talent in the Czech Republic, Christophe Bazan took the men junior title. He will be one of the favorites for the world title, but his form remains a question mark after an illness-hampered season. Women's junior side is also looking quite good there, with Bukovska and Grohova going 1-2, with Grohova slightly surprising, perhaps taking the win, but both riders have done quite well this season on the World Cup scene, so keep an eye on that. The elite woman title went to Kristina Zemanova. She also took a walkover win, attacking super early. Second place went to Katerina Dudorova, a first-year U23, with Simona Spesna finishing third. Zemanova, Issam, we talked about her very briefly in our preview podcast, that we knew her season was affected by COVID-19 infection. Let me just read a couple of things from an interview she gave to the Czech television today. July and August were great. I won a gravel race in Mladá Boleslav where I had comparable times to a number of guys. It was a signal that things would be good this cross season, but then came the turning point. I got infected by COVID, but I didn't notice it. It came up as an unsuspicious cold. I trained normally and even raced the gravel world championships with it. After that I hit the wall. It stopped me in terms of breathing, heart rate and fatigue. I've been fighting it since the end of September and the improvement has been terribly slow. For a long time I could only do endurance training. After a short time my body stopped working at higher intensities. I was unable to break down the lactic acid and was drowning in my high heart rates. There was a month and a half when I could only ride short endurance rides. I was just maintaining my endurance base and there was zero progress. That was a huge challenge. I can't afford to go to the World Championships only half prepared. I can think maybe I'm starting to feel better now, but it might not be that way. I've made that mistake a number of times this season. I certainly don't want to go there for a 5th or 6th place at most. I have to come to terms with the reality that my level is a lot lower and this season is wasted. I need to believe that I'll be at the top again next year, so I will be taking a month and a half off before slowly restarting doing running, swimming, and then hitting the gym. After that I'll start building my endurance base again, all focus on next season.
Yeah, well, that is obviously it was heading that way, I have to say, because if you look at how she opened the season and was struggling in the somewhat easier HSF System Cup races, I think that there already you could just see that it was not great, and I think that over the course of the season it just got more and more visible, and yeah, then as painful as it is, sometimes you need to make those decisions, and I think that this is a decision in which there is no really much you can do about it, and you have to make sure that you get over it and prepare yourself well for next season, and I think that is what she's going to try and do, and it is a shame because it's hurting a little bit the progress, it's hurting a little bit the growth as a rider, but it is what it is, and you cannot really change it at this point. And I think overall there's not really much for her to gain. despite the fact that you still have a World Championships coming up, but if you just know that you're not going to be 100%, I think after the success in Tabor and how that season went, there really isn't really much to gain from this last part of the season. So I feel that for her, after the Nationals, it's maybe a good time to call it a day and build back up and try to be better but next season.
I do agree with you there, because if you look at her season, and she mentioned it herself in the interview, like she took a number of rest breaks, right? So she started her season, and yes, she won, but she was pushed to the limit by 2 juniors. So she took 1 week off and then tried to prepare for the European Championships, get in a rhythm, didn't work, takes another week of rest, doesn't work out. Then tries another week of rest before hitting the European scene or the Belgian scene. Belgian scene in Zonhoven, first race there goes horribly, 25th, goes back home and then kind of realizes, look, okay, this is a wasted season, and it's always hard to admit, but sometimes you need to make those tough decisions. And frankly, with how severe these injuries or these long-term COVID effects, I should say, sound, it probably wouldn't have mattered, right? Like if she had come to that conclusion early in the season, the entire season would have been wasted. But you see it quite often in cyclocross. Like a rider break their collarbone quite early and they're super eager to get back into the racing that they forget about their endurance base and struggle all season. It's always tough to make those decisions, and it's easy when you have the bird's eye view, but when you're actually you depend on it, right? Like your money is dependent on it. You're racing for your sponsors. They want visibility. You're the biggest name on your team. So those things are always factoring in. And since you have a bit of time now, Issam, I would like to briefly discuss something here with you. Last year, Zemanova got the opportunity to ride for a Belgian team. I heavily suspect that was Charles Ligois. She said, I did not advance or take any further involvement into their offer because they offered me way less money than that I make here racing in the Czech Republic. Of course, the know-how of that team is much better, but I can kind of understand it, right? Like if they want you to move to Belgium and stuff, but you're barely being paid, it's a tough cutoff there because you also need to pay the house that you're staying in, etc. So that didn't work out. But one thing I was thinking about is Paul Sauze. They are a very specific team. They're competing for an increasingly narrower type of rider. They want the full-time cyclocross riders that are fine with riding a small road program, full cyclocross focus. And that is becoming increasingly difficult because a lot of the riders want to combine road with cyclocross. And Paul Sauze is unable to offer such a program that I feel they might, for the first time in Mette Penningen's career, need to look outside of Belgium for their riders. And I kind of thought, well, Zemanova fits that profile for the women's side. Betsema is heading out. Could kind of work. And what about Bazant? It's 2 Czech riders. You can kind of bring them on board. They can be supported by their local families when they race in the Czech Republic early in the season, and they can race in Belgium for the rest of the season. To me, it would make sense, apart from, of course, the nationality, which is not something Mette Penningen has typically done.
I totally agree with you. I think that probably one of the bigger issues is how can you sell that to a team and who is going to sell that to a team. I think that a team needs to see the added value, and I think that normally you would say that results and the potential should be enough. But I think that in cyclocross at the moment, at least if you look at the bigger Belgian teams in a way, it is still a bit difficult to sell foreign riders to a team from Belgium. And I feel that it's hampering cyclocross in a way because, as you said, I think that it would be in a way somewhat of a perfect match. As you stated well, it would be beneficial for Paul Sauze to do so. It would strengthen them greatly on the women's side. Picking up a talent in Bazant would definitely not hurt them that much. But, as you said, even the discussion that she had where she was probably a bit lowballed and they were trying to maybe get, in their eyes, a good deal. It's an issue, and I don't know how you can solve that issue. Is that an issue that you can solve? Maybe you should speak to them, to be honest, and represent them in certain deals and maybe try to sell them to Paul Sauze. But I think that is probably the best thing, because if you look at cyclocross as a whole, I think that only the satellite teams of Roodhoofd are the ones that really, I wouldn't say gamble, but really take quote unquote foreign riders, because I have used that term, but it's a bit of a weird term. But the foreign riders, in a way, that they're not Dutch, that are not from Belgium, those riders, they take a risk with those riders if they see talent and if they kind of feel that they would be of use in both cyclocross and on the road, Alpes in the Koning and or the dev team. I think that is it is an issue, and it will hamper the sport for the years to come if it doesn't change. And hopefully it does. And as I said, I think it's going to be important for those riders that are in such positions to try and sell themselves to Belgian teams and Belgian teams to see the value in it, and maybe see it as an opportunity to grow their team and make it more international and try to get international sponsors on board. But I think something in me says that it is almost like living in an utopia, and I don't know if we will see something like that become reality, but it would be it would be great for the sport if it was somewhat in that direction and it was able to come to fruition in a way or anyways.
It will be difficult, and I also don't really see it happen with Paul Sauze because, well, that's probably the most Belgian-centric team you can find, right? Like, sure, a couple of Dutch riders at most, and that's where it has stopped. Sure, they had the Italian rider, Maschiarelli, but that wasn't a great success. So it's hard to see Mette Penningen do it, but I feel maybe the tides of cross, where the number of cross-specific riders are thinning out quickly, then maybe he will be forced to do that and forced to kind of go in that direction. And the team has announced Quick as a new sponsor. That's a French company. They have Labrador now as a sponsor, which is a Swedish company. So the sponsor pool is becoming a bit more international. And while the Czech Republic has nothing to do with the countries of those two riders, or those two sponsors, sorry, that's, yeah, I can't really see it happen, but it might be forced that way. And yeah, just to pick in on what you said about Alpecin, they picked up Viezzi and Casasola. That are two pure cyclocross riders from Italy. They don't really have many ambitions elsewhere for the moment. So that's a great addition for them to their team. And since they're competing against Paul Sauze, maybe they will need to start convincing their sponsors, hey, it doesn't matter if a Czech rider is wearing our jersey, they're still at the front of the race, right? We'll still get the name recognition. And how many people specifically buy Paul Sauze or Sibel Clementines because Iserbeat is the one wearing the jersey? Or do they just buy them because they know the name, because they saw it at the front of the TV on Iserbeat's jersey? And does it then matter if that's Iserbeat's jersey, Sparvel's jersey, Viezzi's jersey, or Zemanova's jersey? That's probably the way you need to start selling that. But again, it's hard. So we'll see what comes from it. Paul Sauze is definitely a team to keep your eye on this upcoming transfer window. I think we can slowly come to a conclusion on this podcast. French U23 Championships, BCO taking the win ahead of Sparvel and Lequet. I just wanted to share a couple of quotes from there. So Sparvel, after taking the win, he said, quite funny quote, "Cyclocross isn't a 50-minute race on Zwift. There are turns, run-ups, relaunches, accelerations. It's the full deal. I've worked hard on my core cyclocross the last 2 weeks. I felt like the skills I was lacking in Hulst and Zonhoven hurt me, but then I realized I'm not Van der Poel or Van Aert. I can't arrive and win a cyclocross race straight away. It doesn't work that way. It took me time, and now I fully understand it. I am optimistic about my form heading into the final part of the season and hope to do as good as last year when I finished 4th at the World Championships. Beating Sparvel here is a good start. That's not an easy opponent." And Lequet, who was 3rd, he is a rider who was a second-year junior in Fayetteville in the 2021-2022 season. It was a bit more on him. He had a very bad summer when he was battling Crohn's disease, and he's slowly starting to feel good again. So that's promising. Then, I know, Issam, you're dying for these results. My prediction was right. Nelia Kapetai won the Albanian national title ahead of Marcela Luzi, and for some reason the UCI website only has a 4th place listed and no 3rd place, with Ornella Doel claiming that 4th place or 3rd place. I would imagine it's 3rd place, and they just missed a number there. The men's title went to Olisan Velia ahead of Henry Hissa and Ankel Limaya. Don't think we'll mention those names anytime soon again on the podcast. Any comments, Issam?
I don't think we will. Maybe on one of those start lists before the race, I will go over it and maybe see one of those names pop up. But I definitely think that those are not the names that we will mention for a top 10 anytime soon. But thank you for the information. I think the listeners will definitely have added that knowledge to their brains and capacity of if it was able to fathom it. And I guess we can call it a day and focus on tomorrow, which is, I think, also going to be quite packed.
Certainly. I will say Kabatai is a rider that will probably come across a bit more. She's quite decent racing in the Italian scene. But apart from that, yeah. Also national championships this weekend. We'll go over the rest tomorrow. There was no other racing today. So, yeah, we'll be back tomorrow covering the Belgian men's race. I'll be attending the Dutch Championships, so we can say something useful about that. Very, very muddy course there, or at least parts of it. So I'm going to get my boots ready. Thanks for listening. Issam, again, thank you for being here. And see you guys all tomorrow. Goodbye.